Thank you all for being here and for coming to celebrate MacDowell and Baldwin's legacy. I have the good fortune, is this okay, the sound? Yes. I have the good fortune of being the director of the library, the Schomburg Center, where Baldwin read every book, as he said in that video. So it's a real honor to be up here to talk about him. I first came to MacDowell 25 years ago. Right now you might be saying, I didn't know they let 8-year-olds into the colony. Though I was considerably older than that, I was still, as they say, a baby. I was remembering over dinner that I actually slept that time in this very building. Upstairs they used to have a few cots. So that first year I had the studio Omicron, and I got to experience my first metal day and had the good fortune to meet a number of longtime friends who, over the course of my several return visits, I met at one dinner table or another. My writing life, and indeed my life, would be utterly different without this place that Baldwin called his, quote, favorite sanctuary for writing. That first metal day in 1993, a visitor knocked on my Omicron door. It was a painter who said he wanted to see his old studio. "I'm Benny Andrews," he said, "and this is my wife, Nini Hemphrey. We met here." I was young, but no dummy, so knew who he was. A tremendously gifted artist whose work I only came to know better and admire over the intervening years. After a few moments, they turned and walked across the field that's behind this building. I've never told anyone that story before. His work also happens to be on view in the library, as you'll see tomorrow and I hope you saw tonight. I returned to MacDowell again and again, luckily, including to the studio Hayward, named after the writer of Porgy and Bess, and where poet and activist Audre Lorde once stayed. Had she written, "Poetry is not a luxury," there, knowing that 3 meals or a roof over your head weren't luxuries either? Her presence gave me hope as I read the boards which record all the people who stayed in the studio before you, called tombstones. You sign these tombstones when you leave, which always felt to me less like a loss than a renewal. Those names inscribed there, some of those no longer with us, were still there and watching over me as I wrote and napped and wrote some more. It is in this spirit of renewal that we are here celebrating tomorrow's renaming MacDowell's glorious library after the spirit and memory of James Baldwin, who came here 3 times, as you know, between 1954 and 1960. Tonight, to honor this auspicious occasion, I wish to read from one of Baldwin's earliest writings, the personal autobiographical notes, rarely reprinted in full, that accompanied his first book, Notes of a Native Son. So this is Baldwin. Any writer, I suppose, feels that the world into which he was born is nothing less than a conspiracy against the cultivation of his talent, which attitude certainly has a great deal to support it. On the other hand, it is only because the world looks on his talent with such a frightening indifference that the artist is compelled to make his talent important. So that any writer, looking back over even so short a span of time as I am here forced to assess, finds that the things which hurt him and the things which helped him cannot be divorced from each other. He could be helped in a certain way only because he was hurt in a certain way. And his help is simply to be enabled to move from one conundrum to the next. One is tempted to say that he moves from one disaster to the next. One writes out of one thing only, one's own experience. Everything depends on how relentlessly one forces from this experience the last drop, sweet or bitter, it can possibly give. This is the only real concern of the artist, to recreate out of the disorder of life that order which is art. The difficulty then, for me, of being a Negro writer was the fact that I, in effect, was prohibited from examining my own experience too closely by the tremendous demands and the very real dangers of my social situation. I have not written about being a Negro at such length because I expect that to be my only subject, but only because it was the gate I had to unlock before I could hope to write about anything else. I don't think that the Negro problem in America can be even discussed coherently without bearing in mind its context. Its context being the history, traditions, customs, the moral assumptions and preoccupations of the country. In short, the general social fabric. Appearances to the contrary, no one in America escapes its effects, and everyone in America bears some responsibility for it. I believe this all the more firmly because it is the overwhelming tendency to speak of this problem as though it were a thing apart. About my interests, I don't know if I have any, unless the morbid desire to own a 16-millimeter camera and make experimental movies can be so classified. Otherwise, I love to eat and drink. It's my melancholy conviction that I've scarcely ever had enough to eat. This is because it's impossible to eat enough if you're worried about the next meal. And I love to argue with people who do not disagree with me too profoundly. And I love to laugh. I do not like Bohemia or Bohemians. I do not like people whose principal aim is pleasure. This seems like not true. But it was true once. And I do not like people who are earnest about anything. I don't like people who like me because I'm a Negro. Neither do I like people who find in the same accident grounds for contempt. I love America more than any other country in the world. And exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. I think all theories are suspect, that the finest principles may have to be modified, or may even be pulverized by the demands of life, and that one must find, therefore, one's own moral center, and move through the world hoping that this center will guide one aright. I consider that I have many responsibilities, but none greater than this, to last, as Hemingway says, and get my work done. I want to be an honest man and a good writer. Thanks, James.